Welcome to Wellness for Entrepreneurs, where we have meaningful conversations with founders. This podcast is about exploring, educating, and empowering entrepreneurs on maintaining wellness in their entrepreneurial journey. My name is Matebe Jobo, and I am an entrepreneurship investor, scholar, and evangelist. I am your host. Every first Thursday of the month, we talk about issues around emotions and fear in entrepreneurship. In this episode, we talk about global trends that have created uncertainty and perhaps some anxiety for entrepreneurs and business people around the world. Over the last few years, the world has been going through an unprecedented amount of change, shaped by technology shifts, geopolitics, climate change, and social economic factors. This year, we've seen how the COVID-19 pandemic has spiraled the entire world into further change. But what aspects of these changes present serious considerations for entrepreneurs? This is Wellness for Entrepreneurs, episode 11. In this episode, we talk to Bongivangeli Buthelezi on aspects of these mega trends that entrepreneurs should be thinking about. Bongivangeli Buthelezi, a political and economic commentator. His well-rounded knowledge of geopolitics and global trade is exactly why he's the perfect guest to help us think through this. Welcome to the Wellness for Entrepreneurs podcast, Bongivangeli. I'm so glad that you can join us on this very important topic.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Alrighty. So let's get right into it and think about the growing trend of nationalism as well as inward-looking countries. COVID-19 has resulted in many countries closing their borders and focusing inward. We have seen both positive and negative feedback on global organizations such as the World Health Organization and how they've dealt with the pandemic. Even before the pandemic, we have seen less and less of a focus on multilateralism and the institutions that support it. We saw how Britain fiercely negotiated to exit the European Union. And of course, we saw President Trump's campaign on putting America first. In your view, are we likely to see a growing trend of nationalism and inward-focused countries?
I think firstly, what I would say that, as you've also noticed, that COVID has actually revealed to us the fractures that were lying underneath the surface of multilateralism and cooperation of nations across the globe. It's been a source of concern, and it requires that leaders actually look at it in terms of finding better ways of cooperating. But with that being said, because I think trust is at the foundation of everything that nations can do together, as in every relationship. The big challenge that we've seen, there's a big deficit of trust among nations, and there's a big deficit of trust also among nations with the multilateral institutions that are supposed to be not political, like the World Health Organization. Yeah, so the fact that, for instance, China did not level with the world at the beginning in terms of what was going on, for whatever reason, people have pointed, actually drove a wedge between China and the rest of the world. And also the fact that the World Health Organization did not level with the world in terms of the fact that COVID could be transmitted from person to person, even though Taiwan had warned them at the beginning that this is possible, has also brought huge and serious doubts on the credibility of what an important institution that is supposed to be apolitical, that is supposed to be serving the best interests of everyone, not just certain individuals or certain countries. So the perception of bias, whether it's there or not, also works to undermine any form of cooperation that is much needed right now as the world fights the plague. So with that being said, it's going to be really difficult going forward in terms of seeing the nations working together. But what I see happening in my view is that there's going to be cooperation between the countries of the so-called free world, and there's also going to be closer cooperation of the countries that are not so free. I'm just going to say China, Russia, Iran, those sort of countries, because those countries are not burdened by the issues of public perception because they don't have democracies and all those things. So even now, when it comes to the issue of developing of medications and vaccines, you've seen the fractures that, for instance, Russia was the first country to declare that they had a viable vaccine that has been tested. But the West just didn't believe that their cue is working. But when the US and France and the UK say they have a vaccine, it seems that people are more likely to try that vaccine. So there is a level of distrust, not necessarily from country to country, but between blocks of countries. So we're going to see a lot more cooperation that is alliance based. But also, what I would say though is that it is very important for the World Health Organization to regain its trust among the people so that it takes out all forms of perceived bias. Because some have alleged that the World Health Organization is doing China's bidding, whether that's true or not. There is a perception of that. It is very important we regain the trust of these institutions so that the weak countries can, because weak countries actually depend a lot more on these institutions than the big countries. So that's what I'd say. But with regards to the other thing of inward looking nationalism, it's really hard to say. With regards to right now, it would really depend on how successful the Brexit move is in terms of how successful regards to how are the British people able to achieve the goals that they want to achieve, whatever those goals are in separating from the EU. And if that is successful, I mean, is as less painful as some have suggested, it would actually pour gasoline on the more nationalistic outlook that we've seen rising around the world, also in Europe, with France and those yellow vest protests, even though they are not about nationalism as such, but they have a lot of nationalistic undertones. The Donald Trump 2016 Put America First agenda has also depending on whether he is reelected, which we are looking at this election to see, does he win re-election or not? And if he wins re-election, it also puts some gasoline to say that maybe people in certain parts of the world are inclined to say we want to put our needs first. More, not that we don't want to cooperate in a globalistic world, but to say that there is a push in major economies and in major civil societies to say we want to put our needs first, we want to put our people first, and so it's going to be difficult to see. It's interesting. It's worth watching to see where it lands. Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Do these people actually really have genuine concerns that they felt left out by globalistic world? Because globalism has been espoused as this great thing. If globalism is great, does it have losers? Um, and if those losers who are not necessarily bad people, like for instance, there are people in the US who were born in Kentucky, went to school in Kentucky, went to the same church, want to work in the same town, married to the woman from down the road. They don't want to go anywhere, and they want to work right there where they are. So there's also that level of saying, what about these people? Is globalism leaving them behind? Which is the same thing also, I guess, in Europe, especially in rural UK, especially in northern UK, of people who just they're not interested in the free movement of people. They just want to live in rural UK and live their lives and farm their land. So how then does an increasingly globalizing world also cater to the fact that there are just people who just want to stay at home and they still want to have high paying jobs, and they don't want their jobs to be, let me just quote unquote, their jobs taken to China. it's a discussion that's gonna have to be debated and discussed among thought leaders and among political leaders going forward in terms of how do leaders balance their duty to their people while also honoring their international obligations and recognizing the changing world in the globalized society that we live in. And how can we also realize that not everyone thinks of free movement as something to be pursued. They There are some people who have never left Texas their entire lives, who've never seen a Democrat, for instance, or there are certain people who never gone further than 100 miles. And do these people not belong in the 21st century? So those are questions that are important that we need to see in the next few years that they need to be answered.
When you think about these institutions, most of them were founded, right after World War II, with the intention of bringing fairness and better cooperation in the world in general and promoting free trade. So where you see bilateral type of agreements promoting relations between two countries. I think Germany was one of the countries that actually manipulated those types of agreements, leaving the rest of the world behind. And so it makes me wonder if we are at a point where we're wondering about nationalism and its relevance, to your point around somebody who grew up in Kentucky, doesn't want to go anywhere. What does it mean overall for entrepreneurship, for innovation, and for global trade? We've seen recently how the lack of these institutions from a multilateralism perspective, or where they're being trampled over, has led to, for example, countries like the United States putting tariffs and illegal tariffs on China, based on their perception that China is stealing intellectual property and so forth, and they're not trading fairly. So I think certainly without these multilateral institutions, we are going to see global trade struggle, and we are going to see limitations in entrepreneurship. In your view, these limitations, do they inspire, or are there more reason for us to feel a lot more anxious as entrepreneurs and innovators?
It depends also on which side of the power struggle you fall in terms of as an entrepreneur or as a business person. I'll start by saying that it does seem that because the genesis of these multilateral institutions is steeped in power structures. I'm not inclined to say that because they are steeped in power structures, therefore they are not legitimate. We just need to recognize that and find a way to negotiate our way around, because they are very helpful, especially for less powerful nations, especially in the developed world, or less rich nations. Looking also at the issue of, for instance, of the World Trade Organization, which you're referring to the ruling that it made with regards to the United States and the tariffs, illegal tariffs that they imposed on China. Just because we have these institutions, it doesn't mean that they're acting actually fairly, or maybe the rules are fair. Or at least in the perception of the United States, they feel like that since China joined the World Trade Organization in 1999, if I'm not mistaken, around that time, China has been gaining an unfair advantage over the United States and also over other countries. And also their argument is the rules of the World Trade Organization are structured in such a way that they favor developing nations, which obviously makes sense. But does it really make sense that China be considered a developing nation when they are the second biggest economy in the world? And they are so powerful, they are more powerful than the EU. It does seem that China, everyone is entitled to due process. So I'm just going to put at the level of allegation that China, it is alleged, engaged in very ruthless trade practices all over the world, including with Africa, which is a topic for another day. And so the United States of America, for instance, some of the things like, for instance, that China devalues its currency, which has been an open secret for a while. The United States says that this is unfair. Those are non-tariff based means of giving themselves an uncompetitive of giving Chinese goods uncompetitive advantage, and other non-tariff based interventions that China engages in, which the United States feel like they are unfair. But also, it seems that certain major Chinese partners as well feel the same way, like the UK, um, like Australia. I don't know if you heard Morrison speak lately about their relationship with China. He is entirely not head Morrison of Australia. Yeah, so, and then also there are issues of intellectual property theft. I was watching a briefing by the FBI and Department of Justice. Was it early this year, where they were listing the allegations against the Chinese government and Chinese nationals of stealing of intellectual. So I'm going to say allegation because everyone is due to due process of stealing intellectual property, of forced intellectual property, that if when American companies go work in China, that they are forced to hand over their intellectual property to a local Chinese partner, and then the local Chinese partner reverse engineers it. So all kinds of those sort of behaviors that the US says we cannot spend millions of dollars in innovation, and then the Chinese, through its government-owned entities and other affiliated entities that are affiliated to the Communist Party, either steal or buy the technology and then make our innovation and research advantage be moot. So then why are we spending so much on Silicon Valley and innovation if someone can just come and take whatever they want from us? So that's the allegation. So the question of whether then the US using the 200 billion, the tariff on the 200 billion in goods is right or not. I'm saying right as opposed to legal, because it's illegal with regards to WTO, is really up to interpretation, depending on who you ask. But I'm gonna say that I don't put it past Donald Trump to withdraw from the World Trade Organization. He has actually threatened to do it, and we know that he is not as afraid to do it because he has already withdrawn from the World Health Organization. So if Donald Trump and the people who he represents through the electoral mandate of the American people believe that the World Trade Organization is unfair to the American people, and they withdraw from the World Trade Organization, that's also going to have a huge blow on multilateralism in the world, and a huge blow in terms of the structures of trade in the world. So, but whether Donald Trump or Joe Biden wins this election, I don't see this trade conflict with China going becoming better, because now there seems to be almost universal bipartisan consensus in the United States that China is their number one geopolitical rival. And then not just that, but also that China presents a huge threat to the United States of America in terms of national security and all those other things with regards to technology theft. So that where you find that where Donald Trump and Nancy Pelosi agree on very little, and Chuck Schumer, but they do agree on this one thing. So it's just that, like, if Joe Biden wins the election, he's probably more likely to withdraw the sanctions, and he's going to be probably use kid gloves, if I've used that phrase, to deal with China as opposed to the hard line that China is using. But I don't see a policy change because of where the minds and hearts of the American people are. So with regards to that, the implications on entrepreneurship and business in the world, I do see that people who are aligned with the United States, like the Japanese, like South Korea, like Vietnam, and India, especially India in the ICTS industry, business people, entrepreneurs there, and small businesses are really gonna benefit through this so-called trade war, trade dispute between China and the United States of America. Because as much as the United States wants to move a lot of their production and value chain out of China, it is not physically and pragmatically possible to return the stuff to the United States so that they can have the so-called made in the US. So what's actually going to happen is that they're going to move a lot of their production to countries that are allied with them, which would mean that if you have opportunities in those countries as a business, as an entrepreneur, you are well placed to benefit. And it doesn't just mean just Japanese entrepreneurs. It means that anyone who is friendly with the Japanese and South Korea who wants to do business there, they are more likely to actually benefit. So actually, I think what I do see happening is that, because also Japan, because of COVID, the plague, they did mention that they are moving their production lines and value chains out of China because of national security reasons. And also the United States is moving some of their production of masks and all those things out of China, not because of trade so much, but because being able to manufacture ventilators and masks and gowns and all those surgically needed and clinical things is as much as a trade thing as it is national security. Because if you need insulin and your insulin production depends on your rivals to produce, then it becomes an issue of national security that are you actually able to get what you need? Yeah. So what I see happening on the side of the West is that entrepreneurs who are aligned with the US, and especially entrepreneurs who are willing to move money to the United States of America, are very well placed to benefit. Because if I'm going to use the America is open for business, the phrase, that's basically what is going on right now. Or that is at least what Trump's constituency look at it. They look at it that way. Yeah. So, but on the side of China, there's also a real, because you know that like China now, then they are moving a lot of so they are moving closer and closer to Russia and closer to Iran. So we're going to see a lot of these realignments that those who are close to the United States are going to benefit, but also those who are close to China will benefit because China now is going to depend a lot more on Iran for their energy needs and a lot more on Russia also for their energy needs. And Russia announced this year that they're going to roll out Huawei as their 5G operator. So even though China loses with regards to having their innovation and their technology being pushed in the Western world, they have other alternatives. So in a bipolar world, we will see development in a sort of dual lanes happening depending on which side you are on. And most frankly, I think that if you are friendly with both, especially for people like South Africa or entrepreneurs from South Africa who are friendly with the West and who are also friendly with Russia and China, these are actually exciting times to get into win-win situations and business arrangements with both of these powerful countries and powerful blocs. There are challenges, but it is an exciting time for entrepreneurs, just depending on who's your friend and who calls you a friend. But on both sides, it does seem to me that it's really exciting, that there are a lot of opportunities to be made. There are a lot of opportunities to be taken, and it's actually a great time to be alive for entrepreneurs.
You're a lot more optimistic. Look, I think
yes, I'm a lot more optimistic.
Yeah. Look, I think the points you're making around how China is playing, so how China has played the game to be the second largest economy in the world, presents challenges to, I suppose, in general, the general agreement of countries and nations as to how we do business and how we conduct ourselves. But on the other hand, we cannot help but look at the United States as being challenged. For the first time, here is a proper challenger, and it is China. So, but it's the same country that was very comfortable in putting most of its manufacturing using cheap labor in China. So it's quite interesting now that China has found a way to almost augment their R&D or their research and development curve. It is now starting to become a problem. So in comes 5G, right? 5G is set to completely transform the way we live and, completely create unprecedented high-speed connectivity, which then ushers in the true might or the true feeling of the fourth industrial revolution. But we saw how this was a fierce debacle between the United States and China, where at some point there had to be 4.5G for some firms in the United States just to create some competitive edge. And China then had to say, well, 5G is not 4G plus one, right? We have actually been working on this thing and we are really ahead of the technology curve. And so you've got a couple of other actions that happen after that, where all of a sudden we have an act that then bans Huawei and ZTE from being used in the United States. And now we've got Google Play Store not being completely part of the Huawei phone as we know it. And so on the one hand, you're quite right in a sense that there's an opportunity for innovation as these struggles, as these power struggles happen. But I'm just wondering in my mind, for entrepreneurs that are outside of these power struggles or even within, is it really possible to innovate or really be that entrepreneur that leads the curve without finding or facing yourself in these limitations at some point? So it's fine for you to be an entrepreneur, but you can't innovate ahead of the United States, or it's fine for you to be an entrepreneur, but then you must play by China's rules. So how do you see the limitations that then entrepreneurs must factor into their growth journey?
I think the power structures are quite a big variable in terms of how a modern day entrepreneur and one who's in innovation is going to operate. There is the issue of self-interest, both on the side of China and on the side of the United States. I know better not to be making judgments in terms of who is right and who is wrong, because at some level, they are both motivated by self-interest. So in a sense of saying, then if Donald Trump says America first, I suppose that's exactly what China are doing. Their first priority and responsibility is towards the Chinese people. So in terms of then the issue of 5G and the trade war and ZTE and Huawei, it's actually complex because on one hand, there's the fact that Huawei is ahead in terms of their development of 5G technology, which is one legitimate issue. And then there's also, on the other hand, the fact that Huawei presents a serious national security threat, because this is not just now an allegation that is presented by the United States of America and they've made their case, but also the United Kingdom also is alleging the same thing. And so is Australia, and so is Canada. And so the main allegation is that Huawei is owned by a company that has deep ties to the Communist Party of China. And since everything in China has to go through the Communist Party of China, they build backdoors in their hardware that uploads information to Beijing. And so if you have this technology installed in offices around your country, in corporates, in government buildings, what level of national security risk do you presents your country by using this technology? And then another issue also has been that Huawei's innovation, at least in the United States, has been mainly driven by them stealing technology. That's an allegation, obviously, from the United States. Um, but ZTE, the ZTE were actually, they pleaded guilty to stealing technology in the US. They were actually found, someone, they stole, I just don't have the notes with me now, there was a particular, because they're also involved in robotics. So this particular person who was a Chinese national who was based in the United States, um, was found to have stolen some um, intellectual property with regards to a hand of a robot, and soften it to China. And then they pleaded guilty. They paid millions of dollars in fines. It's almost 2 years ago now. So those are similar sort of infringements of rights that Chinese-owned companies are involved in, which then blurs. What is then the fight? Is the fight about who is ahead in innovation, or is the fight about these people are stealing from us on the side of the United States of America? Or it could be very much be both, and it's kind of hard to decipher which one is it, because one can use another genuine reason as an excuse for other things. Yeah, but I think what would be helpful for innovators is to understand what the fears are of a particular nation or their security forces, particularly for the United States of America. Their number one concern is, or at least from what I'm gathering, because if you're listening to people trying to understand what it is really that they fear, so that you can work with them in a way that is a win-win situation, is that they don't want innovation that puts the national security of America at jeopardy. And they don't want foreign nations to be collecting surveillance information on people in the United States, even though they are doing the very same thing themselves through Google and Facebook and other companies. So when you're navigating the fact that, how then can you operate in the ICTS industry, in innovation, and satisfy the security forces of the United States, for instance, that you are not posing a national security risk to them, then you have some wiggle room to work within their system. On the side of the Chinese, I mean, they have over 1 billion people. I'm gonna have to confess that I'm very fearful to engage, to be deeply involved in the Chinese market, mainly because it's difficult for any innovator or entrepreneur to have any due process in China if anything goes wrong. In terms of, if you have a Chinese partner and they cheat on you in terms of in business dealings, if you're going to take them to court, you don't know that you're going to get due process. You don't know if you're going to get due process if you go to court, if there's a dispute between you and the government. And even though the United States of America can invoke national security reasons and excuses for infringing on people's rights, you are more likely in the free world as an innovator and an entrepreneur, whether it's in the US or in Europe, to have, if you have genuine concerns about a government, that you can actually go to court and have the court ruling in your favor. That has actually happened. So that's so even though I'm hopeful and optimistic about entrepreneurship in the right now, in the age of 5G, I'd say my concerns for me is that entrepreneurs might consider entering markets where there is an independent judiciary, entering markets where you will get your due process rights if anything goes wrong. And so there are billion people in India as well. And you are more likely to get due process rights there than in China. And I'm not saying that people shouldn't go in, I'm just saying that People should weigh those options and make decisions that are best for them, best for their families, best for their companies, best for their goals. But I think for me, it is a serious concern that if I'm going to go into any market, even in Africa, my number one concern when we think about entrepreneurship is the independent judiciary. Am I going to be able to innovate in this country and not get my technology stolen by the government, or stolen by someone who's politically connected, and then I'm not able to have justice done in court? So there are things like that. Yeah. So basically, we will see how this 5G innovation battle lands. Um, but we see that, like for instance, Huawei has also been banned in the UK, but Germany has not banned Huawei. And so is the rest of the EU. But there are quite a few EU countries who are seriously considering their relationship with Huawei, not because of the innovation race that is between China and the United States, but because of their particular national security concerns that they have. But also, with that being said, the EU and Europe in general is heavily reliant on China. So politicians have to balance the issue of what are we going to do because we need stuff from China, but at the same time we need to protect ourselves. So it's basically a dance of finding the right balance. A clear example of this actually is how Germany does business with Russia, even though Germany is part of NATO, and NATO is supposed to be defending Europe against Russia. But Germany is heavily linked to Russia through its energy, natural gas, and now the Nord 2 stream that is being built. And so Angela Merkel and the people there have to sort of balance the issues of security against Russian aggression and their need for Russian natural gas. And it's often difficult to see which is the right way to go when a country might have two genuine needs that are conflicting. So I think that might be a similar situation also with the issue of Huawei and the battle with 5G. That there are often two or more legitimate claims and needs that a country needs to balance, and it might not be obviously purely commerce or purely national security. It might be a combination of both, and each and every country and its government has to make those decisions based on what is best for their people as they as they see fit.
Wow, that's such great insights. Thank you for that. And you're just making me think about, the need for leadership, the need for conscious leadership, because of those balancing acts that countries are having to do on their own, globally, bilaterally, as a group or block of countries. For me, the case for leadership becomes critically important, both for entrepreneurs as well as general citizens. And I think we could learn a thing or two, for example, from the banning of TikTok. So for example, ByteDance, being the developer of TikTok, was just the app itself. TikTok has been banned in the United States. ByteDance has managed to pause it, for a moment. And what is interesting about ByteDance is that it is truly one of the world's largest unicorns. So valued at over 100 billion US dollars. And however, it has strategic partnerships with the Chinese government. So much to what you were pointing to earlier, which include, the Ministry of Security. And so in comes those claims around, surveillance national security, and so forth. However, it also is venture capital backed by American investors such as Secure Capital, as well as Japanese investors such as SoftBank. So that's the thing about global trade, in a sense that it allows entrepreneurs to access capital and talent and scale across the world that they would not necessarily have had access without global trade and without multilateralism or without even globalization, right? And so, again, in turn, they bring value to those investors who bring value in their own countries. So, in comes for me the point of leadership to say we do need some kind of conscious leadership to enable this type of progress from an economic perspective, from an entrepreneurship perspective, from an innovation perspective. However, it does need conscious navigation, in terms of balancing even the technology implications themselves, from an ethical consciousness perspective. Do you think we are close to this? And what are the steps that we would need to take to drive this type of conscious leadership? And actually, what would it entail for most countries as well as multilateral institutions?
I'm less optimistic on this front. Yeah, particularly because it does seem to me that leaders um, are willing to infringe on people's rights if it serves whatever purpose it serves. And the issue of TikTok, for instance, you put it very well that it is that I mean the company has ties to the Chinese government, but also there are elements of venture capitalism. It becomes really difficult in terms of really knowing what can be trusted, because at the end of it, everything, the foundation of everything is trust. And as things look right now, for instance, I'm just because now TikTok, Huawei, ZTE, in a globalized world, it's very difficult for an international institutional investor or individual investor who wants to invest in companies and in great opportunities that are arising from China without having concerns about the Communist Party, because the line between the Communist Party and the private sector is not clear where it begins and where it ends. Jack Ma, I love Jack Ma very much. He is also part of the Communist Party. So it becomes difficult to know if you get involved in companies that have ties to high-level Chinese authorities. How do you know what is safe and what is not? And where private and public begins and where it ends. Starting with the Chinese government, they need to do a better job in making sure that people actually have confidence that if we engage with Chinese capital or if we engage with Chinese innovators, we are not putting ourselves in danger. I think that's really where there's a trust deficit. And if China wants to be, I'm just going to use a phrase that the Americans use with regards to Iran, where they say, if Iran wants to be treated like a normal country, it needs to behave like a normal country. So I think it's a similar thing with regards to China, that maybe China needs to do better in being more transparent with regards to our privacy rights not being violated. Because TikTok is a treasure trove of information, personal information, or well, not unlike Google, and it is unlimited in terms of the things that you can do with that kind of information. The app is free, you are the product. I think we've learned that, and the dangers are limitless in terms of what can be done with this information. And I think there needs to be an understanding now between the people and leaders in terms of how do we manage 21st century innovation that is engaged with such high levels amount of data. Now we're going into AI and we're going to deep learning and artificial and all those things. where information is received at such high rates and stored at such high rates, and what can be done with it is for good is also unlimited, but also what can be done with it for bad is unlimited. There is a conversation that needs to happen, a social contract that needs to happen about responsible innovation, because as things are, we are not really even close to being at a place where we can say we are confident, even in the free world, that as innovation goes forward, our rights are being protected, our privacy is being protected, and all those sort of things. So, so there needs to be some sort of, like, like in post civil, like after the World War II, there was a meeting to discuss the post-war arrangement of the world, so that we do not have another situation like that. I think it's actually a high time that we have a cyber sort of get together, from leading leaders from Europe, from Asia, from Africa, from the US, to discuss what are ways that innovation can be responsible and can respect people's rights.
No, I like your train of thought, because as an individual entrepreneur in the fourth industrial revolution age, you have a responsibility to develop technology, value propositions, and products that are responsible, and are mitigating all those dangers that we've now pointed to, theft, surveillance, and so forth. At the same time, I agree with you in a sense that we need a post World War II type of analysis in the current and modern world, because you know it's shifted beyond just tariffs and fair trade per se, which is, it's still relevant. I mean, we've seen it with China and the United States and so forth. However, I agree with you that we need some kind of global cooperation, global agreement, a new type of social contract that looks at emerging technologies and, the type of innovations that are coming out of there. I totally, totally agree with you. But not only that, we need some kind of mechanism then that also deals with impending global crises or threats, right? So we've seen COVID-19, but climate change is definitely another one, that is looming. And depending on who you listen to, you either think it's a real threat or you think it's not, right? And so the world, though, needs to get to a point where we almost have this new social contract, and we're able to navigate these new challenges that are really exciting, that are brought about by technology, which can be really exciting, but also they need to be used in the most responsible manner. Do you think the world is able to do that? Do you think the world is able to organize itself and coordinate itself to deal with these types of issues? Or are we really, are we far from it? Are we still dealing now? Are we now going back into nationalism, getting back into our own little cages, and dealing with our own problems? Or should we, or is the journey for us to organize and deal with these real world issues and challenges going to be easier for us?
I think we are not ready. I don't think we are in a place where we can cooperate to face serious threats that are facing the world right now. And there are quite a few reasons why it's the case. And I think the competition between the superpowers is one of the reasons, because it is very difficult for superpowers to to cooperate when they have a mutual benefit if the other suffers. And I know that just sounds so dark and all, and people wonder that why didn't China warn the world about COVID when they knew about it in November last year? And then there was a high-level Chinese delegation flew from Beijing to Washington to sign the trade deal, the phase one trade deal, with the vice premier, um, well, the third most powerful person in China. There was a big party, shook hands, signed, and they flew out of Washington. This was in January, and they said nothing about the problem in that they were having in China. So questions like these is, why didn't they tell, for instance, their biggest trade partner? And there are no simple answers to this question, but you can see that it is a serious question of saying, why didn't they tell them? So even if they didn't tell the United States, why didn't they tell their closest partners, Russia, Iran? Um, and so these are serious questions that obviously we as the world has so much to gain by working together. And COVID has revealed that if we do not work together, we don't stand a chance. But it seems that even though we give lip service to working together to face serious threats, our actions show the opposite. So also using the same issue of COVID, also then China started buying um, uh, masks, and like at a huge scale, where then it became difficult for the rest of us to get masks. But we don't know that there's a crisis. They're buying masks. We don't have masks. And by the time we know, China has all the masks, and we have, and so now everyone is just a sitting duck. Yeah. So those are serious trust questions that need to be discussed among superpowers, among nations, that we cannot have a situation like that where we have a global pandemic again. Because if we have a global pandemic that doesn't have a 98% survival rate, but has a 98% mortality rate, and we are not transparent, what's going to happen to us? So these are questions. And then there's an issue also on the issue of multilateral organizations, that we really need these organizations to be credible. We really need these organizations to not only be free from bias, but also to be free from the appearance of bias. Because that's exactly what the World Health Organization, I'm not like right now, maybe in the next few months or in the next few years, the World Health Organization will really need to work on regaining the trust and confidence of many nations, because we need the World Health Organization, particularly developing countries and those who are less powerful, because the United States of America has CDC. They have the majority of all infectious disease experts. They can take care of themselves. They're manufacturing their own ventilators. The rest of us can't do that. So we need these organizations to be credible. We need these organizations to give us facts, facts only, not information that is tainted by political considerations, or the appearance um, of such things. Yeah. So I think we also need to have a discussion as the global community of how then do we re imagine these organizations so that they can actually have trust from the people. And then the issues of other threats like global warming, like the issue of bioweapons, the issue of nuclear weapons, and many other threats that can actually be said to be existential threats. The chat, I mean, you did mention that depending on who you listen to, you get a story of whether global warming is a real threat, and some would say no, it's just a farce. I suppose in a similar vein as the World Health Organization, the scientific community needs to give us information that is credible, information that is not tainted by ideology and political considerations, so that when each and every one of the leaders in the world, they look at the data, they can be persuaded at the level of data that this is not an issue, that this is not politics, this is not ideology, there is no hidden agenda, this is purely science. And be honest with, because when scientists lose credibility because they are lying to people or they are withholding information, it also contributes to the speaking past each other. Yes, global warming is real. No, it's just global warming alarmism. And where I find that we may probably need a climate or environmental. I know that the United Nations has a body of that, so that looks at climate change issues. I'm just not so sure about how seriously it is taken by the world, including the world powers. So, which is also is to say that we need those kind of institutions to be credible at the level of science, that whatever documents they produce, you can take it to the bank that this is science-based, this is fact-based, this is evidence-based. This does not depend on what ideological leanings you fall onto. But also, with that being said, we cannot ignore the economic considerations that nations weigh when they look at these threats like global warming. Because like the number one polluter in the world right now, which is China, which is followed closely by the United States and then by India. If China were to stop using fossil fuels right now, like particularly coal, their economy will be crippled. So their proposition to the Chinese government that you need to wean yourself off fossil fuels is certainly a dubious proposition, not at the level of science, but at the level of saying their entire claim to fame is that we're a giant economic power. So if you close down the engine to our economy, what's supposed to happen? So it's, and then I know that people will say, but we have a legitimate question of saying, do you want to have a growing economy or do you want the earth to survive? But practically speaking, governments are not going to sacrifice the livelihood of their people because of maybe of often conflicting scientific reports. So we also need to find a way here at the level of saying, how do we balance genuine concerns of people that their livelihood depends on fossil fuels, depends on coal, depends on fracking, depends on oil, depends on gas. For instance, if you look at the United States of America, for instance, when Hillary Clinton said in 2016, I'm going to put coal miners out of business, that was the end of her presidential run, because West Virginia depends on coal, Pennsylvania depends on coal to a large extent and oil. Forget about Texas. Texas is an oil. I mean, even though now Texas is probably like like number two to California in terms of Silicon Valley, in terms of like ICTS industry, but the majority of the Texas economy is energy based. So if no matter how moral your motivations are as a political leader, if you are saying to people you're going to put them out of business, and here's the concern. For instance, I'm going to make an example about West Virginia, where you have this guy. He has worked in coal for 40 years. His wife has worked in coal for 40 years. His parents has worked in coal in the same company for 40 years. That's all they know. And this industry has taken care of them for 3 generations. And then you say to them that they need to learn to code. Firstly, it is very insulting. And secondly, they don't want to code. They want to work in code. So it's just, how then do you find a way to give people alternative ways in order for them to live and be able to take care of their families, and at the same time address these genuine needs that need to be addressed, because often there are two or more genuine conflicting demands that people have to address. And so and there might be maybe some like something like so if you're moving people off coal, for instance, we have nuclear power. It's carbon neutral, and at the level that we are right now, if you are operating nuclear energy at places that are not coastal, so that you avoid a Japan Hiroshima disaster, at places that are not along a tectonic fault line. So there are ways in which in the next 10 years, West Virginia can move totally to nuclear, as for instance, the French power grid is 72% reliant on nuclear, and they have zero nuclear incidents, because the research that we have at this moment makes us be able to process nuclear for peaceful purposes and be able to deal with nuclear waste in safe ways because of how advanced the research is right now, both in Europe, Asia, and in the United States of America. So there are ways in which right now or in the next 5 to 10 years, the carbon footprint in the world can be reduced drastically just if politicians have the political will to move to energies that are carbon neutral, like nuclear, like hydro, and use these energies and technologies in places that are safe, as I've said, and in ways that are responsible, environmentally responsible, in ways that nuclear waste can be handled. And from what I'm looking, because I've been reading a lot about like the handling of nuclear waste from nuclear reactors, that it normally takes up to 40 years to process nuclear waste. But from the technology that is coming out of Stanford and places like MIT, we have the capacity, we have the technology to reduce our carbon footprint globally without causing job losses. That's basically that has been true for actually a very long time. It's just that we don't have political will for some reason. We just don't have political will to do it. But it can be done. There are certain energy sources that can be used, that we have the technology to use right now, like nuclear, for instance, like hydro, for instance. That we can use, and people can still maintain their middle class lifestyle. Because at the end of the day, the calculation that politicians have to make is that here are people, they want to live their American dream or whatever dream they're wanting to live. And the fossil fuel industry has given them this opportunity to live this American dream. So if you are saying for existential reason you want to move us away from fossil fuels because of carbon, I'm saying that right now we do have the technology. We just don't have the political will to do it. Yeah. So but also with that, at least at the level of the West. But I'm gonna have to say to you, Mateo, that I'm really concerned about China and their environmental record, not just with regards to carbon emissions, but with regards to the level of toxic particles that get released in major cities in China, which include carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide, CO2, CO, and include very reactive sulfur like sulfur dioxide and other sulfides, and other sulfur elements that are sort of bonded to a metal of some sort. And then what ends up happening is that people inhale these things and then they implant into their lungs. and people end up having serious respiratory problems. And so the issue of air quality and environmental problem in developing countries, especially in Asia, it's very worrying, especially with regards to the impact that it has on the people, on the Chinese people. And also there are also other countries also it's a similar situation. So that's very worrying. Oh, another big issue, which is not global warming, the issue of plastic pollution. That's really an issue that is of serious concern. Um, and yeah, that we also need, as I was saying, maybe we need an environmental and task force to talk about these things, not in a political fashion, not in an ideological fashion, but in a way of saying, okay, we are producing so much plastic.
I agree. Look, these issues actually present a great opportunity for entrepreneurs across the world to develop innovative solutions to some of these problems. So for me, I see it. We're going to go back
Yes, yes.
To saying entrepreneurs are actually in an exciting space because there are a lot more problems now. So you have to pick your problem and almost run
Yes.
with it. But these entrepreneurs will require a stable and coordinated effort to solve these problems. So I suspect entrepreneurship and innovation will take us to a certain point, but then what the rest of the world must do from a government perspective is to make sure that they are themselves stable and reliable. Just in closing, I mean, if I look at entrepreneurship, so entrepreneurship is really about pushing and influencing your environment and creating the new. And that's why I'm really hopeful about some of the solutions that will come out of entrepreneurs and innovators. But just so that we focus our minds and we calm our anxieties, what are those things that entrepreneurs can do to influence the stability and the global cooperation that we need to see so much in our lifetime or in this world? Yeah, so what are some of those things that entrepreneurs or citizens can do such that they are really then masters of their destiny and not necessarily waiting for the rest of the governments to catch up or even multilateral institutions?
So one of the few things that are coming to my mind, well, the first thing that I'll say is that people must study engineering. Obviously, I'm going to suggest that because of my background, but also because like the solutions that we're gonna need that are needed are mostly engineering solutions and of all sorts of sort of engineering disciplines. And with regards to particular chemical engineering, because I was reading about how in Stanford, for instance, they are doing a process that they discovered that plastic can actually be reversed into, because plastic is actually made from oil, that the process can be reversed. And like engineers love reversible processes because reversible processes, you can direct a process in either direction depending on what it is at the time that you want, and it's actually very helpful. So a particular, even though this research is still at its infancy, it's such an exciting research project that it can be scaled, it can be commercialized, um, and it has nothing to do with government. It just has to do with engineers looking at a problem facing the world, and so those are the sort of things that make me say people should consider studying engineering. Is activism. So I know that this activism word now has become like such a it can be a swear word in certain circles, but I think within our areas of influence, within our spheres of influence, bringing these issues to our colleagues, bringing these issues to our bosses. So that those are the things really that that come to my mind. But also there are certain things that we can do in our day-to-day lives, and speaking with our friends, with our siblings, with people in our lives about how to be better citizens, how to be better stewards of the world, to make people more aware of the challenges that we face, and also how we can collectively play a role in our individual levels, not necessarily depending on government.
Thank you so much for your time, Bongivangeli. I mean, you have been such an incredible
Yes.
source of wisdom, especially at this time. I think you've simplified issues, that we hear being discussed on the radio, on TV, on the internet. You've kind of really simplified it and really made it land for us as human beings as well as entrepreneurs. So thank you so much for your time. I truly appreciate it. This must be one of the longest recordings ever in terms of content, but there's so much, and I really appreciate how much you've just deposited into this episode. So thank you so much. Thank you for listening to the Wellness for Entrepreneurs podcast, a space for meaningful conversations with founders. Please click on the link below to subscribe and follow us on our social media channels. Goodbye.